Kandahar Airfield, Southern Afghanistan, August 2002. Captain David Morrell, 3rd Special Forces Group, United States Army, had been running joint operations out of the same forward operating base for 11 weeks. He had worked alongside Canadians, British, and Dutch. He understood Allied forces. He understood how they were trained, what constraints they operated under, how they reported up their chains of command, and crucially, what they would and would not do when the situation deteriorated past the point where the manual remained useful. He thought he understood them all. Then the Australians arrived. What followed over the next several months was, according to official U.S. Army after-action reviews obtained under Freedom of Information requests, an experience that multiple American Special Forces officers described in terms suggesting not merely professional admiration, but something closer to ontological disturbance, a recalibration of what they had assumed was possible inside a sanctioned military operation. One captain, quoted in a joint doctrine assessment compiled by U.S. Special Operations Command in 2003, put it with a precision that had probably been carefully considered before it was committed to paper. They did things, he wrote, that we would never have been authorized to do. That sentence contains the entire question this account is going to try to answer. Not what the Australians did, though the operational record is detailed enough to make that clear, but why. Why a unit operating within the same alliance, under broadly the same legal frameworks, drawing on decades of shared doctrine, produced operators who were, by the testimony of their closest allies, playing a fundamentally different game. The Australian Special Air Service Regiment was not invented for Afghanistan, it was invented for the jungle. When it was established in 1957, borrowing its structure and operational ethos from the British Special Air Service, the unit was designed around a single foundational premise. The Special Air Service soldier would be, before anything else, capable of operating alone, not in a 12-man team, not in a 4-man patrol, alone, in terrain that would kill him by degrees, from heat and disease to disorientation, before any enemy had the opportunity to do so more efficiently. That capability was not a secondary skill, it was the primary filter. Everything else was built on top of it. Selection for the SASR was by the mid-1990s one of the highest attrition processes in any Allied military. Pass rates were consistently between 15% and 20% for candidates who had already been recommended by their commanding officers and who had requested the course multiple times. The physical component, a long-distance navigation march over the Stirling Ranges in Western Australia, was not designed to be merely hard. It was designed to be an assessment of breakdown, a calibrated measurement of what an individual did when everything that normally anchored their performance, including physical capability, sleep, nutrition, and peer support, had been systematically removed. What remained, the residue that could still navigate, still make decisions, still keep moving, was what the regiment was selecting for. They called it informally SAS thinking. The phrase meant something more specific than thinking under pressure. It meant thinking in the absence of the institutional scaffolding that most soldiers and most humans required in order to think at all. Afghanistan in 2001 and 2002 rewarded exactly that cognitive profile. The initial phase of Operation Enduring Freedom worked faster than almost anyone planned for. Kandahar, the Taliban's spiritual capital, fell on December 9th, less than 2 months after the campaign began. But the Taliban had not been defeated. They had dissolved, dispersed into mountain terrain along the Pakistani border, into sympathetic villages in Kandahar, Helmand, and Uruzgan provinces, into a form of distributed resistance that the invasion's targeting logic had not been designed to address. What came next required the ability to operate in small numbers, in remote terrain, without reliable communications, without timely air support, without a clear operational picture beyond what could be gathered by direct observation. It required, in other words, exactly what the institutional history of the SASR had been oriented toward producing. The American model for special operations in that environment was a hub-and-spoke architecture, Operators deployed from fixed bases into the field for operations measured in days, carrying significant communications equipment, maintaining continuous contact with command, operating within targeting approval chains that required confirmation up the hierarchy before most kinetic actions could be taken. The logic was sound. It preserved command and control, created accountability, and reduced the risk of unilateral decisions made by small teams without adequate situational awareness at the command level. It was a system optimized for the management of risk. The Australians operated on a different logic entirely. The regiment's doctrinal inheritance, refined through its operational history in Borneo, Vietnam, and East Timor, had produced a specific theory of how small unit operations failed. They failed not primarily because of enemy action or equipment failure, but because command chain anxiety about loss of control produced delays and constraints that stripped operators of the initiative their tactical situation demanded. The most dangerous moment in a special forces operation, by this analysis, was not when enemy contact occurred. It was the 4-minute window after contact while the team leader was on the radio requesting permission to respond. The Australians did not routinely request permission to respond. This was not insubordination. It was the operationalization of a principle embedded in Special Air Service doctrine since the Malayan emergency, that the man on the ground with direct sensory access to the tactical situation was the appropriate decision maker for immediate action. The formal systems existed to set parameters and document outcomes, not to substitute for the judgment of the operator in the field. That trust ran in both directions. Operators trusted their command to back sound decisions, and command trusted operators with that level of training not to make unsound ones. What this produced, from the perspective of American observers, was an operational tempo and willingness to pursue contact that was inconsistent with what they had been taught to expect from an allied force. Staff Sergeant Robert Killian, 3rd Special Forces Group, who conducted joint operations with an SASR patrol in the Shah Wali Kot district in summer 2002, recalled in 2007 in an interview that the first time he observed an SASR team initiate contact, he spent 3 seconds waiting for the team leader to get on the radio before he realized the team leader had no intention of getting on the radio. The situation had already been assessed, the decision already made, and what unfolded in front of him was the execution of that decision, efficient and precise by men who had trained for this specific contingency under conditions designed to be more demanding than the real thing. That decision was made on the spot. The divergence extended beyond tactics into intelligence. The regiment's approach to human source development in the field departed from the U.S. model in ways that made U.S. command elements uncomfortable and ultimately attentive. An SASR patrol that developed a productive relationship with a village elder in the Mirabad Valley did not, as a matter of course, report that relationship upward through the intelligence chain and wait for guidance on how to exploit it. The patrol exploited it in the field, using the operator's judgment about what questions to ask and how to use that information to orient the next patrol cycle. The reporting followed. The exploitation happened first. By late 2002, this approach had generated an intelligence picture of Taliban networks in Uruzgan and Zabul that U.S. intelligence officers assessed as more granular, more current, and more operationally useful than anything comparable processes had produced. The Australians had built something that the American model, with its greater resources and more extensive infrastructure, had not. The incident that crystallized this dynamic most clearly occurred in Deh Rawud district of Uruzgan province in September 2002. An Australian Special Air Service Regiment, SASR, element of 4 operators, was conducting a reconnaissance patrol in a river valley when they identified a compound associated with a mid-level Taliban logistics coordinator. The patrol's tasking was reconnaissance. It had no authority to conduct offensive action. The patrol observed the compound for 6 hours. During that observation, it confirmed the logistics coordinator and identified 2 additional individuals whose descriptions matched Taliban commanders associated with the Quetta Shura logistical network. 3 significant targets in a single location. Reconnaissance logic suggested the contact should be reported and actioned through a formal targeting process that, in the realistic assessment of everyone involved would take between 48 and 72 hours to produce authority, by which time the compound would be empty. The patrol did not wait. The patrol leader assessed that the opportunity was fleeting, the intelligence sufficient, the force geometry viable, and that the cost of waiting, the permanent loss of 3 significant targets, outweighed the institutional cost of acting outside the authorization chain. The patrol prosecuted the target. All 3 individuals were killed. The patrol reported everything in full within 2 hours. The after-action review was a structured and somewhat remarkable event. The SASR commanding officer determined that the patrol leader's decision fell within the latitude extended to SASR operators in recognized target of opportunity situations. The U.S. command element determined it would not have been authorized under U.S. rules of engagement. Both conclusions were correct. They simply reflected different institutional answers to the same underlying question: how much independent judgment a trained operator could be trusted to exercise in the field. No complaint was filed. No disciplinary action was taken. The intelligence exploitation of the compound produced documents that advanced the understanding of Taliban logistics networks in Uruzgan, and the CIA Kandahar station assessed that it advanced understanding by several months. The 3 individuals killed were precisely who the patrol leader had assessed them to be. The decision, evaluated by its outcomes, was sound. What it revealed was not simply a question of rules of engagement. It was a question about what kind of institution produces operators capable of making that call correctly, capable of exercising under pressure, in the dark, with incomplete information, the kind of judgment that the formal authorization chain exists in part to replace. The answer of the SASR was embedded in its selection philosophy and institutional culture. You did not build that capability by training people to follow instructions more precisely. You built it by selecting for independent judgment under degraded conditions, and then building an organizational culture that extended sufficient trust to that judgment to allow it to be used. There is a question the American Army has been asking itself for the 2 decades since those first joint operations in Kandahar. If you build a system designed to manage the risk of bad decisions by distributing authority upward, you will reduce the frequency of certain bad decisions, and you will also systematically reduce the quality of good ones. The SASR institutional bet was that the latter cost, accumulated across thousands of tactical situations, was higher than the former, that the damage done by preventing good decisions outweighed the damage done by occasionally permitting bad ones, provided the selection process was rigorous enough to make bad decisions genuinely rare. American officers who spent time in the field with Australian operators were not, as a rule, willing to say this in official forums, but the after-action reviews, read carefully and in full, say it for them. There are things the documents suggest in their measured, qualified, officially anodyne language that the system you have built will not let you do. And some of those things, the patrol leader who did not get on the radio, the 4 operators who looked at each other in a river valley in Uruzgan and made a decision that was not theirs to make, turn out, when the accounting is finally done, to matter considerably.